Hello everyone. Welcome to yet another PTC Talk webinar where we are honored today by having Jan Koniecko, if I say that correctly, Manager Sustainability Advisor at Cognizant for a session on sustainability business model for manufacturing. But first, a very quick introduction about myself. My name is Carl Jensen and I'm Customer Success Manager for PTC in the Nordics. And we are running this webinar same time every week, where we invite customers and partners for some inspiration on the digital transformation to see what's possible and how to make things happen. And all the past webinars have been recorded and are to be found on the registration site. The agenda today is a quick overview of PTC, and then Jan will start by introducing himself, touch base on a few challenges, how to address these, and then explain some business outcomes. And at the end, we are also having a few questions placed for Q&A, so please keep your questions to the end. So we'll get started with the next slide, please. Yeah, next slide. Yeah, thank you. So PTC is an international software company with headquarters based in Boston. We are developing software mainly for manufacturing companies since 1985. We offer tools for the digital transformation, such as CAD for design, PLM for managing data, IoT to connect products and manufacturing operations, and augmented reality to visualize and interact with the digital thread. So to you, Jan.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me along. Really happy to be here. I cannot see anyone, but that's still the reality of virtual meetings like this. But I still hope we can have some interaction as well in the chat. Quickly, let me this forward. Yes, so I would like to talk about sustainable business models for manufacturing today. I would like to give you a quick introduction into who I am, where I'm coming from, and then would like to make the case for why sustainability is good for business, and then a view on how to implement sustainable and circular business models with an information perspective. So because also Cognizant works a lot on digitalization and data and information is very much at the foundation of sustainability as well. So I would like to explain that a bit more. And then we have some time for Q&A at the end. Quickly about me, I lead the sustainable products and circular economy offerings at Cognizant. My background is in sustainability economics. I did a PhD in circular business model design in Delft in the Netherlands. And I also have a 20% position as a postdoc at Maastricht University in a project called Circular X, which is very much about the transition from selling products to providing products as a service, adding more service to traditional sales models, and how that can be done in a way that doesn't only provide a superior customer experience, but also is good for the environment. Yeah, my background is really very much on the one hand, business model design, but also I was always interested since more than 10 years in how do you actually measure sustainability. So that's also something that I'm focusing on at the moment, and also we'll talk a bit about how do you then actually measure environmental impacts and how does that relate to the business case for sustainability. So as a starting point, I would like to make a quick introduction to sort of the problem space of sustainability. And with that, I would like to ask you a question to put in the chat, but please only write it in the chat. Do not press enter yet. I will tell you when to press enter, okay? So the question is if you're familiar with the figure that you see here with the so-called planetary boundaries framework. Maybe you can respond with yes or no, and then Carl can give me a quick response back, you know, where do we sit with that? So please type it in, and then I say 3, 2, 1, and then go, please enter. So Kai, what do you see?
I see a lot of no.
Okay.
I see 1 yes.
Okay.
No, lots of no's.
Okay, great. No, then that's
So
always
average no. Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's always good to know as well, because then I can think a bit about how I want to frame this, also make it useful for you. So really, the starting point, I think, if you haven't heard about this framework, I think it's a really important. Let's say, really important evidence about environmental sustainability that I think everybody should be aware of. There is a so-called planetary boundaries framework that has been developed out of the Stockholm Resilience Center. It's a research institute. And what they have done is they have quantified different planetary boundaries that we shouldn't go beyond in order to maintain a safe operating space for humanity on the planet. So the figure that you see here on the right, there are different categories. And if you see, for example, here's climate change, and the safe space is really this dotted line here within the planet, and climate change, for example, has been transgressed. So this is usually measured by the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and how that's changing the climate. Of course, it's on many organizations' agenda these days, the question of how they can address climate change and decarbonize their operations. But there's really a lot of other categories. So it's not only about climate change. It's also about, for example, novel entities. This has recently been quantified. Novel entities refers to mostly plastics that are leaking into the natural environment in an uncontrolled way. And that's actually been the most recent boundary that has been quantified. Then there are others like land system change, has a lot to do with deforestation, but also land use change when it comes to converting land into agriculture. And that's a lot driven by food and agriculture industry, with mainly driven by meat and dairy production, as 85% of all agricultural land on the planet is dedicated in some way for meat and dairy production. And very much related to that is biosphere integrity. The a bit cryptic formula you see here is basically an indicator for species abundance. So in the last 50 years, across the board, species abundance has gone down by on average about 70%. So it's actually very much out of the safe boundary, and this is now also being addressed next to climate change as sort of the next big environmental challenge that needs to be addressed with a nature positive framework until 2030. There are some plans, governments are getting together to think about, you know, how they can make sure that that species bounce back, because it's really we as humans and as society depend on nature in ways that we don't yet understand fully. And if we are playing kind of Jenga, you know, this Jenga game where you take the blocks out and we are sitting kind of on top, we're taking the blocks out from below, and at some point things might collapse. So it's the point I want to make here is, first of all, you know, this is an interesting framework that I think is really important in the whole sustainability discussion. And there's also a Netflix documentary, actually. So to see on the left, you see, you know, I'm assuming many of you have a Netflix account. So it's called Breaking Boundaries. It's a really nice documentary that I would really recommend to watch if you haven't heard about this yet, which sort of, you know, explains it in a much better way than I just did. But I just wanted to sort of set the stage here that that's a bit the problem context in which at least the environmental sustainability debate is happening. But I also don't want to take this kind of doom and gloom perspective, you know, because I think sustainability isn't just, you know, an externality, an environmental problem that businesses need to address because governments putting more regulations out, or because customers are demanding more sustainable products. There is a big business case for sustainability. And the best framework that I've come across so far has come out of New York University, a framework to calculate the return on sustainability investment, as really is to quantify the financial benefits of investing in sustainability. And the rationale here is really when companies embed ESG, environmental, social, and governance risks and opportunities in their strategy, then they can improve on a lot of factors. They can manage their risks in a better way. They are engaging their stakeholders. They are becoming more efficient in their operations. It's good for talent management because more and more younger generations, you know, they are searching for some sort of meaning and purpose in the workplace, and they are much more inclined to work for an organization that they know, you know, they have their direction in order, they are doing something, they are developing different products and services that are helping to solve sustainability problems. But also supplier relations, because the data that you need oftentimes, you know, you basically build better ties with your suppliers. Media coverage, reputation is a big issue. So across the board, really, sustainability can be quantified, like what benefits does it deliver? And when you invest in these aspects, then you're driving revenue growth, greater profitability, and then also a higher corporate valuation. So that's really, I think, the business case for sustainability is actually kind of, we are already almost beyond the point where you know, the question is it really good for business? Is it not good for business? I think we are beyond that point. It's clear it is good for business, and this is a really nice framework to quantify those benefits. And I would like to talk a bit about, sort of from a manufacturing point of view, which has mostly been in manufacturing classically, making products and then selling those products, right? So if in a classical value chain that you see here is kind of, there are those raw materials that are being extracted, being processed, and then there is production. Then the product is sold, it gets to the user, the first hand, maybe it gets to second-hand use, and then it ends up in the waste bin. And the reality of this business model, and this is still the dominant business model, even though there are a lot of companies that are moving away from this business model, it's still the dominant one. You kind of have a clouded view. You don't really know where your raw materials are coming from because there are several tiers in between. There's a lack of transparency. And you also have a clouded view when it gets to sort of beyond the sales horizon. Because you're basically, with a sales model, you're transferring ownership, you're losing control of the product, you don't know where it ends up. So it's a very limited business model in the sense, what information do you have about your upstream supply chain and your downstream supply chain? And now I'd like to contrast that with a business model that's emerging more and more with product companies, that's product as a service business models. What they do is they enable several use cycles that are under the control of the company. So companies can retain the value of the products after they've been sold. When they provide their products as a service, they can invest in a better customer experience. They can get products back when they aren't used anymore, put them into a next use cycle and monetize them again. And so it creates a business incentive to really monetize products and components and materials over time, and the value is basically controlled and recaptured over the product life cycle. And then what that does as well is, if you get products components back, you can work with your suppliers, you can work with your upstream supply chain on, first of all, redesigning products based on what you learn from the use phase about when products fail or how much maintenance and repair needs there are and so on. And then you can also organize return flows. And what that does really also is this clouded view gets lifted a bit. You get more transparency into your raw material base that you have to provide your products. And moving to a product as a service business model is also a cornerstone of implementing a circular economy. You might have heard of a circular economy. It's kind of, there are big plans, the European Green Deal, there's a circular economy action plan in Europe. Also in other regions of the world, the circular economy is big on the policy agenda. And it's really about these R strategies that you see here in the middle, right? Reuse, repair, refurbish, remanufacture, and then ultimately recycling, right? Recycling is kind of the last resort of a circular economy, a real one. So these inner circles are sort of preferred because they really, you don't have to do so much to reuse a product. But if you want to recycle the materials, you need to put in a lot more energy and a lot more cost. And the goal of a circular economy is really to minimize natural resource extraction, because you're becoming more productive with your materials, to maximize the value of products, components, and materials, and then to minimize waste, emissions, and pollution in the process. So why is product as a service models, why is it an enabler of a circular economy? Is because when companies don't sell the product anymore, but they provide them as a service, then they still own them, right? It's still their assets. So if they still own them, they have a natural incentive, a business incentive, to make sure that the products that they put on the market, that they last as long as possible, that they can be monetized for as long as possible. And that creates the incentive to invest in these R strategies. And this is really a long transformation journey, but it provides the incentive. And this is why the product as a service business model is such a crucial element of a circular economy. I would like to give you an example to illustrate that a bit, because there are actually many examples. The research project that I mentioned in the beginning, we have built a database of, I think, more than 200 companies and examples so far that have sort of started servitizing lots of different products. It doesn't work for every product. I just want to bring in that caveat as well. As a company, you always need to carefully assess, does it actually make sense to provide that product as a service, or is a sales model better? Or maybe, you can add service to a product sales model. It doesn't have to be the full sort of servitization. HP, I think this is a really interesting example, because it really illustrates that this move is not only good for the environment, but also good for business. They have implemented what they call Instant Ink. It's basically a subscription service for people at home that use home printers. So the classical way would be that you buy the cartridges, you replace them in your printer, and then when it's empty, you throw away the cartridges and you buy new ones. So they built a subscription service where you send back the cartridges. These cartridges get recycled, and then you get basically new ones, or get reused first, refilled, and then recycled. And what that did is it provided a more than 70% lower carbon footprint of ink purchase and distribution, reduced energy use and lowered water use, and double-digit growth in subscriptions with more than 9 million subscribers in 2021 and consumer net revenue increase of 55%. So this really, like, that's kind of the what you would like to have, right? That combination of a good business case and evidenced and demonstrated environmental impact reductions. Now, with that sort of initial view on product as a service models, why sustainability is good for business, and how product as a service models enable the circular economy, I would like to go a bit into what are some of the ways of how that can be implemented in practice. And that's really important to take a life cycle perspective. Now, life cycle perspective in my case means basically the complete value chain. So you start with the material extraction, then there is some transportation, the manufacturing, there's again transport, then there's the customer use phase and transportation, and then at some point the product ends up in the waste bin. And along each of these stages in the life cycle, there is some form of resource extraction to make it happen, right? You need to extract the resources that you need in the beginning, but also for the manufacturing, again, you need energy and you need maybe some additional materials. And then at each stage as well, there are some emissions, there's some waste, and there's some pollution. And this is what I refer to from an environmental point of view as a life cycle perspective. There is a method called life cycle assessment. It's a scientific method that has existed for a long time that helps to assess the environmental impacts of a product or service along the whole life cycle. And now what manufacturers usually have is they have the best view of this manufacturing stage, right? That's often referred to as scope 1 and scope 2. And it's at the moment, most companies focus on accounting for their greenhouse gas emissions. So they look at how much fuel is burned on site in the factories or by the vehicles that you are operating. Scope 2 is purchased energy. So what is the energy that you're buying to power your operations? And then scope 3 is kind of everything else. So your raw materials, where they are coming from, transportation, use phase, end of life, and so on. But this life cycle perspective is the first step to implement sustainable and circular business models. You need to get more visibility into your upstream supply chain and to your downstream supply chain. Understand these impacts, understand where there are hotspots, where are actually most of the impacts, in what categories, and so on. So I also sometimes refer to this as environmental intelligence. In this world where we are breaking planetary boundaries, there are new regulations coming out almost every day across the globe, environmental regulations. It's really important for organizations to develop environmental intelligence. And the only way to do that is to take a life cycle perspective and to understand the emissions, waste, and pollution at each stage and the resource extraction that is required to make that product happen. And now there are three main components to innovating the business models around this. So the first one is obviously in the upstream supply chain, right? So you also need to activate different teams in the organization that all need to do their share in improving the impact of the product or service, and at the same time innovating the business model behind it. So procurement managers are really important because they need to start buying better. They need to understand from their suppliers, hey, what's the impact of that kilogram of aluminium that I'm buying from you, or anything really. They need to engage their suppliers, get more information, and then maybe buy differently, buy from different suppliers, or with long-standing relationships with suppliers, which is often the case. You need to start negotiating about different inputs, different alternatives, about them maybe switching their energy base to renewables to improve the footprint and so on. So buying better is a big aspect of that. And of course, also logistics operators. And then build better is the next one, right? It's the operations, so all the factories, energy management in the factory, waste management in the factory. And then, of course, designers and engineers who need to start designing products in a better way, because classically in a sales model, products have been designed in a way that, are they easily repairable? Can they be easily maintained? Can they be remanufactured? Are the materials recyclable? All of these aspects haven't really been considered, let's say, in the mainstream of product design so far. And that is one aspect that needs to change. And then the whole downstream aspect that I would say is about serving better. Serving better has this whole aspect of how do you deliver customer value, what is the customer experience, and the teams that in a service model, when you move more towards, getting more involved with your customers in the service model, it's maintenance and service teams that are really in the operations of the customer to understand the product usage in a better way, value engineering to understand, okay, what value is being created from the service model, customer success managers, and then further downstream, even up until recycling, that, as a company, you can engage with different recycling companies to understand the products that you're making. Do they have trouble recycling them? And that really, requires maybe visiting them, looking at, okay, the product, what do they do with it? Do they know what materials are inside? Do they know how it can be disassembled and so on? So this is like, let's say, the three main components of how sustainable business models can be implemented. And that's a big challenge. It's a huge transformation, and one of the main reasons why it's such a big challenge is because there's just not enough information to judge where materials are coming from, for example, in the upstream supply chain, what their impact is, and so on. Oftentimes, even in the own operations, companies have a difficult time comparing different factories. The environmental performance, like the energy efficiency in factory A, might differ from the one in factory B, and there is no overarching view on that. And then obviously also in a sales model, there is, of course, customer relationship management, but in a sales model, there is a lot less incentive, a lot less attention on, hey, how are the products actually being used and how can it be optimized? In a service model, you really get more transparency into the customer use phase. You get more involved with the customer operations, and then you slowly but steadily start getting more data. And then, of course, you need to feed back that data to designers and engineers, when they understand, hey, this is where the product breaks, and this is how it breaks, and this is how difficult it is to maintain it. All this experience that you gain from servicing your products in the field, you can feed back to designers and engineers to improve the product, and then create this virtuous cycle of material productivity and lower cost, and then you get into really interesting profitable territory over time. Now, in terms of data sharing in the upstream supply chain and downstream supply chain, I would say there are two types of data sharing solutions that are emerging. And I say here in the partnership ecosystem, of course, with Cognizant, we are building up these partnerships. One is digital product passport. It's a lot driven by regulation. The European Commission has plans to make product passport. So think of it like a passport that you have that allows you to travel, that has information about your identity and background. The same for a product, that, there is a product passport that contains lots of information about the material content, who's been involved in making it, and the environmental footprint of the product, and so on. There is regulation coming out as of 2026. The first product category that will be obliged to issue product passports is batteries. And then consecutively, this will be rolled out across all kinds of product categories. An example that provides software, in this case, it's a blockchain-based software to facilitate this, is Circularize. The advantages of this model is you get primary data across the supply chain. It's driven by regulation. Some disadvantages, it requires on-site verification. So every factory kind of needs to be visited, to any batch of material that is then gets sort of certified that this is the footprint, or this is what is inside, or this is what happened to it. So that's costly, on-site verification, and it requires complex value chain coordination. You need to get different value chain actors together to share data and information. Of course, there's a big question of IP as well. What kind of data actually can be shared? There are a lot of concerns of organizations that they share some intellectual property in the process. So this is all being figured out by these software companies to make it in a way that's trusted, that protects intellectual property, but still issues the information needed for different actors in the value chain to recycle the product or to repair it or whatever. And the other data sharing solution is kind of a more artificial intelligence based, really. And I think an interesting example is MakerSite. They collect data from external sources, all kinds of databases, and then they have an algorithm that predicts what is inside that product, what's the environmental footprint of that product, and they can do it with a pretty good accuracy. So this doesn't, the advantage is easier to implement. It has a pretty high accuracy with little effort, but the disadvantage might be that the algorithms tend to be a bit of a black box. So how can you really verify that the results are accurate? So these are just questions that still need to be answered about solutions like this. But this is just a view on sort of, at least from my experience, like two types of data sharing solutions that are emerging on the market. Lastly, I would like to just highlight two cases where Cognizant has helped clients implement this. So there was a project with Jacobs, Dow, Egberts on coffee as a service. Used to be, coffee machines are sold to office space and so on, and then they kind of manage it themselves. So they moved to a service model, and Cognizant helped with the whole IoT platform around it, right? Because you get all this data from the coffee machine. It helps you improve the service, but it also helps you understand, when does it need maintenance. That you can predict maintenance needs, that you can lower the service costs, and then sort of improve the profitability over the time. Another one is a pump as a service with Grundfos, which is a big pump producer in Denmark, where this similar thing, the IoT platform and analytics have been built to move from selling pumps to providing pumps as a service. I just want to highlight these two cases because I think they're interesting, and also they relate to a bit the point that I was trying to make about the service models, but also then the data that you need. And of course, the IoT platform is a really essential part to get data from the use phase. Yeah, with that, I would like to thank you very much for your attention. And I'm open to any questions you might have. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jan, for the very interesting presentation. So now over to the Q&A session, and any question you might have in the audience, you can type it in the chat or raise your hand. If no question coming up right now, I have one first question to start with. What would be your recommendation on how to get started with sustainability, and what stakeholders do you think should be involved?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think an important starting point is top level management commitment. You need the commitment of the board to invest into this. You need a budget. And then one starting point is to make a baseline assessment. So of course, a lot of companies are already assessing their carbon footprint, but really, that environmental intelligence that I was mentioning, make a baseline of your products and services. And then you can start thinking about how you can enable procurement managers or designers and engineers, all the different teams to get the right information, and start changing. A big part of that is also incentive systems. So you need to also tie it in with their performance metrics, right? Even in the board, that they are, also measured on the sustainability performance. There are lots of aspects to this, but I think these are two starting points. Yeah, top level management and setting the baseline.
Yeah, makes sense. Thank you. I will read out a question here from Christian Klein. How is a digital product passport connected to the AAS, Assess Administration Shell Asset? So
I think I don't know. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
I'm afraid.
All right. Maybe Christian, you can add some information on the chat, or Richard, next question we have: how to get this into the food and beverage industry?
Yeah, of course, food and beverage is, every industry has its own sustainability challenges. So I think it's just good to understand, what are the main hotspots. The biggest food and beverage companies, they know that, and have also already invested heavily in the sustainability of their supply chain and their operations. There is a big problem with packaging in food and beverage. There is a big issue with the sourcing, where the raw materials are coming from. So the supply chain transparency, biodiversity and nature is a big topic. So I think there also, another step to start next to what I just mentioned is also to make a materiality assessment, that you understand, what are the material issues to your business. And in food and beverage, those are very particular ones. And then how you address those. I cannot answer that now in a nutshell, but it can be quite industry specific. So food and beverage is its own beast, let's say.
Right.
Yeah.
Last question here. Digital products passport, is it related to the taxonomy regulation in Europe?
Well, yes. I mean, the taxonomy is first of all defining what is sustainable, right? Provide a common taxonomy also for investment managers, but the information to then assess the sustainability of products and services is very much related to the digital product passport, because that will be the information basis upon which to judge how good is the performance of a company when it comes to sustainability.
Great. Okay, I think time is up. There are a few more questions. Maybe if you don't mind, Jan, you could maybe answer them
Sure. Yeah,
in
I'll
the
have a
chat.
look in the
Yeah?
chat. Yeah,
That's great.
no
And I
problem.
think there's one hand raised from, yeah, not anymore, but please write in the question, Heman Dubi, in the chat.
Yeah.
So
Alternatively, you can also, my email is here
reach
on the
out.
slide, so feel free to reach out as well with any questions that you might have.
Yeah. So many thanks everyone for joining, and special thanks to you, Jan. But please stay tuned for the next Nordic Talks already next week. So with that, I wish you all a fantastic weekend and speak to you soon.
Yes,
Bye
thanks a
bye.
lot. Bye bye.